The Institute of Policy Studies of Sri Lanka focuses on the broad theme of economic reforms in Sri Lanka, political, economy and institutional challenges in its flagship State of the Economy 2015 report. The report argues that the conditions of introducing, implementing and sustaining economic reform efforts are weaker today than in the past. A failure to strengthen institutions and governance structures lies at the heart of it. Institutions based on transparent rules and governance structures help instill confidence in investors and businesses to undertake productive investments rather than rent-seek. Ideally, a prudent approach is to implement reforms during the early days of a new government that has secured a fresh mandate by the people. There are a number of complex forces that shape today's world economy, with financial and geopolitical risks on the rise. Global growth remains disappointing and uneven, and emerging economies are set to see declining rates of growth. Global developments on Sri Lanka's external trade will be mixed. The improved economic outlook for US and EU will help major export industries. However, the overall outlook for Sri Lanka's exports is not very positive, given the challenges facing its main export markets such as Europe, the Middle East, and Russia. Sri Lanka's recent trade performance has been far from satisfactory, marked by a decline as share of GDP as well as of world trade. Lack of diversification of exports and markets also remain a cause of concern, with textile and garments, and US and EU markets accounting for a substantial share of Sri Lanka's total exports. Reforms to improve export competitiveness will require addressing constraints on multiple fronts. Specifically, reforms are required to rationalize and simplify import tariff structures, reduce trade and transport facilitation costs, create a better regulatory environment for trade-related FDI, and enable export penetration through strategic trade partnerships aimed at increasing and diversifying Sri Lanka's external trade. A competitive export-led economy will depend, among other factors, on the availability of a highly skilled and trained workforce that can enjoy better quality employment. Sri Lanka's demographic transition means that its population is aging, and the working age population is on the decline. How to source the required workers and utilize existing labor resources more effectively are high on the priority of labor market challenges. Reforms needed to address gaps in coordination amongst different labor market institutions, bridge weaknesses in vocational and technical training, address impediments that deter women from entering the labor force. It should also address regulatory barriers that constrain job creation in the formal sector of the economy. Lack of access to good jobs in Sri Lanka makes migration for domestic work a popular employment choice among women. While it is recognized that migration is a double-edged sword that, on one hand, helps women, it also holds significant social costs. Mitigating legislative reforms include attempts to discourage females with children under 5 years from seeking foreign employment. However, such regulations in their current form discriminate against women, further curtailing their livelihood options. Regulatory strictures on migration must remain open to policy revision. Sri Lanka's female migrants seeking employment abroad owing to lack of access to good jobs at home is reflective of mismatches in the labour market at large. Sri Lanka's education sector has failed to change in line with evolving market demands of the fast globalizing world. There is a high number of unemployed educated youth in the country, yet the business community is faced with a severe shortage of manpower with required skills. Due to the lack of systematic link between secondary education and technical education and vocational training, a majority of school leavers do not have access to skill development. Reforms must focus on allocating sufficient funds for education, enhancing the quality and relevance of the curriculum, address deficiencies in human resources, in recruiting and training, and ensure consistent implementation of proposed education sector reforms. Closely aligned to better education outcomes is the provision of adequate healthcare. While Sri Lanka has achieved noteworthy health outcomes, the country needs to strengthen its existing health system, both in public and private sectors. The demand for healthcare increases and changes shape as the population ages and incidence of non-communicable diseases rise. Sri Lanka is also more vulnerable to global health epidemics today. This pushes up the cost of healthcare provision. Reforms to strengthen healthcare financing and regulatory changes to improve public and private healthcare delivery systems are essential to improve the healthcare delivery in a cost-effective way. Sri Lanka's labour market conditions and changing demographics also hold broader implications for social welfare. As the country grapples with high levels of inequality and vulnerability, revamping the existing social protection system must receive high policy priority. Despite a multitude of programs, a large proportion of the vulnerable population are inadequately covered due to various reasons. Reforms are needed to the current retirement benefit schemes, cash transfers, subsidy programs, and the social protection system as a whole to mitigate inequities and provide adequate social protection in pursuit of broader poverty alleviation goals. The most vulnerable to high incidences of poverty is the rural agriculture-reliant population. Despite the shrinking share of agriculture in GDP, it continues to be an important source of income, employment, food security, alleviating agrarian poverty, and improving export earnings. The agriculture sector, however, suffers from stagnant productivity, limited diversification, and inefficient resource management, leading to food insecurity in the country. The priority areas for reform to support a broader structural transformation of the economy include land, irrigation, and technology development policies, as well as processing, marketing, downstreaming activities to increase value addition to agricultural products. The agriculture sector is also particularly vulnerable to various environmental impacts. Deforestation and land degradation is worsening. Environment pollution is rising from excessive application of chemicals, poor waste management, and air pollution. The country's response to global environment threats such as climate change has many gaps in policy coordination, information, and resource mobilization. To mitigate these, an effective environment management system must be in place. It requires reforms to governance structures to better coordinate policy, strengthen planning and monitoring, to include new tools like strategic environmental assessments. These policy areas are among the many issues that the Sri Lanka State of the Economy 2015 report examines. Sri Lanka must find the policy space to adopt a pragmatic approach and build on an economic reform process in the medium term. What the country must avoid is fractious horse trading that can lead to policy gridlock and undermine the very same checks and balances of good governance that is sought to be strengthened.